What would it take to bend a verdict? Money, fear, or just the right people looking the other way? Why did 12 strangers in a Midwestern courtroom stop feeling like 12 and start moving like one? And how did a story that should have taken weeks to reach a decision come back in hours with a verdict that sounded less like justice and more like a script? Emily Ward asked herself those questions as the clerk called the case of State v. Victor Hawley, and the courtroom settled into the hush that always comes before a public decision. She'd been a Metro reporter long enough to know the choreography. The judge's face carved into granite, the defendant pretending to study the grain of counsel table, the prosecutor stacking papers into neat, menacing columns, the defense attorney pretending not to need the glass of water at her elbow. Juries don't look at defendants when they're about to convict. Most trial writers will tell you that. But what do you call it when the jurors won't look at anyone at all? When 6 of them keep their hands folded on identical blank legal pads, like they agreed during a smoke break to remove every tell? Judge Margaret Dwyer cleared her throat. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreman, Juror 12, a middle-aged man in a navy polo who'd never taken a single note all week, stood without glancing at his colleagues. We have. Emily angled her recorder toward the bench and felt the hair on her forearms rise. The case had everything American news loves: a slick real estate magnate named Victor Hawley, a bribery and wire fraud indictment tied to city contracts and a riverfront development, texts that read like subtweets, a cooperating witness who'd sweat through 2 shirts on the stand, and a defense lawyer, Rhea Park, who could dress down an FBI agent without raising her voice. The whole trial had pulsed for 7 days, evidence piling up, cross-exams drawing blood, and then yesterday afternoon the tempo changed. Jurors stopped asking for readbacks. They stopped whispering to one another. They stopped doing anything except nodding in unison whenever Assistant District Attorney Monroe spoke. It wasn't deference. It was rhythm, and Emily didn't trust rhythm in a courtroom. Rhythm meant someone had set the tempo. On the count of bribery, the foreman read, we find the defendant, Victor Hawley, guilty. A hiss moved through the gallery. Hawley flinched once, then smoothed his tie. Park's jaw tightened just enough for Emily's camera to catch it. On the count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, guilty. 2 counts down. The judge thanked the jury for its service and instructed counsel to be seated while she polled. Them. Polling is the safeguard everyone forgets until it matters. One by one, each juror must say the verdict is theirs and theirs alone. When Dwyer reached Juror 3, a woman in a gray cardigan who had spent the week scribbling, the woman hesitated a breath too long. Yes, she said finally, voice thin. Emily noted it hesitation. Juror 3, 10:14 a.m., and felt the tickle of a story in the back of her throat. After, when the bailiff was guiding the jury out to the hallway reserved for deliberators, Emily watched 6 of them glance in the same direction, past the water fountain, toward a nondescript door, marked Conference B. She'd covered enough trials to know the juror hallways by heart. Conference B didn't lead to the jury room or the restroom. It led to the small windowless space where counsel sometimes met with the judge off the record. Why would 6 jurors look that way at the exact same instant, unless someone or something had trained their attention on that door? Emily followed her instincts instead of her assignment and skipped the scrum gathering around Monroe's microphone on the courthouse steps. Her editor, Sanjay, texted as she slipped into the lobby. Monroe Q and A in 2. You there? She typed back. Get you color later. Trust me. She took the stairs to the 2nd floor and leaned on the rail where she could see the jurors snake toward the exit. Marshals had warned them to avoid the press, and they did a practice drift that carried them past the vending machines. Juror 8 peeled off and punched E5, watching a bag of peanut M&Ms dangle and then drop. He didn't open it. He carried it like a prop. Juror 8 wasn't a candy during verdicts guy. Emily could tell. He was 40-ish, barbered, posture. That said sales or management felt too expensive for county pay. He followed the others out under the watchful eye of the bailiff, and Emily let them go because following them now would be performative, not useful. She had something better, a feeling and the beginning of a pattern. Patterns fed stories. Stories fed sunlight. Sunlight fed change, if the city was hungry for it. Back at the newsroom, the place smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. Sanjay was waiting at her desk, a question already forming. "We needed a lead from the steps," he said. Emily slid him 2 sentences and a photo of Monroe's lips mid-word, then said, "Give me until 5 for the real piece." He raised an eyebrow. "We're a daily, not a quarterly." "Jurors moved like a choir," she said. They were. Too ready. Juror 12 didn't take notes all week and somehow became the foreman. Juror 3 hesitated. 6 of them looked at the same door, like someone had practiced it with them. And you know what else? No requests for readbacks during deliberations, not one. They were in there less than 4 hours and came back with synchronized eye contact. Sanjay stared at her, weighing experience against instinct. "What are? You chasing?" "Jury tampering," she said, the words tasting reckless and right. Not the mobster kind with threats in parking garages. The modern kind soft pressure, off-book perks, coordinated cues. Someone paying to tilt reality by degrees. He rolled a pen between his fingers. "That's a grenade, Ward. You don't throw that without pins. Get me public records on bailiff logs, juror stipends, any ex-parte contacts reported. Pull badge swipes for Conference B if facilities will give them to you. And Emily, if you even think about knocking on a juror's door before we talk to. Legal, I will chain you to this desk." She grinned, relieved. Wouldn't dream of it. She dreamed of it the whole way to the records annex. The county clerk's office hummed with the slow doom of bureaucracy. Ticket numbers, plexiglass, a printer exhaling forms in spurts. Emily filed requests under the State Public Records Act. For every log that touched the jury in the last 2 weeks' marshal assignments, court officer rotations, badge access to non-public hallways, and any vendor invoices for juror meals. Food is where shortcuts happen. Sequestered panels get catered. Non-sequestered ones wander to the deli. This panel wasn't sequestered. If someone wanted to be seen, the deli was a good stage. If someone wanted to be invisible, the courthouse conference rooms were better. She left with stamped receipts and a promise of up to 10 business days, which in county meant 2 weeks if you called every day and 3 if you didn't. She called every day. Between calls, she built a wall of yellow sticky notes on her monitor: Hale timeline, juror behavior, Conference B, bailiff shift, Monroe Park, Formon equals nitrogen monoxide notes. Theo, the data guy, rolled his chair over with a bagel in his mouth. "You look like conspiracy corkboard Pinterest. Flirt with me like that, and I'll FOIA your slack," she said. "Can you pull plate reader hits for the juror garage last 2 weeks? Only if we want to get yelled at by civil liberties," he said, but then he lowered his voice. ALPR on a courthouse garage is technically public in anonymized form. If you can get me the time blocks, I can at least pattern the vehicle classes. Pattern away. She didn't want names. She wanted anomalies. If a panel made of teachers, nurses, and retirees started showing up in German SUVs, she'd ask why. That afternoon, Emily watched Rhea Park hold court in the defense suite. Park didn't blame the jury in front of cameras. She blamed the process. "We respect the verdict," she said. which is defense for we don't respect the verdict. We will be exploring all post-trial remedies. After the mics went dark, Emily asked, "Any oddities back there?" Park's eyes flicked to the ceiling and back. "Oddities are the air we breathe, Miss Ward. If you're asking whether I think my client lost a fair fight, I'll say this. I've never seen a panel refuse a single readback in a case this thick. I've also never seen a foreman who didn't write a word pretend to own a 42-page verdict sheet." Emily held her gaze. Park smiled without warmth. "You didn't hear that here." "I never hear anything anywhere," Emily said, and they both knew that was a lie necessary to get the truth. The first record to come back wasn't a log or a badge swipe. It was a map. Theo spun his monitor toward her. "ALPR classes only. I can't give you plates, but I can give you vehicle categories. By hour for level 3, the juror level." The bar chart looked like it always did weekday mornings. Compacts and sedans ruling the day, a sprinkle of minivans. But the evenings told a different story. On 3 of the 7 trial days, between 6:30 and 7:15 p.m., a spike of premium CUV entries appeared in the juror garage during a time jurors were supposed to be home. Emily chewed her lip. Could be staff, could be lawyers. "Not on level 3, Theo said. "Staff uses level 1, council parks in the reserved lot. We all want a key, so who uses level 3 after hours?" "People who've been told to," he said. "Or people who know a guy with a badge." Conference B bloomed larger in Emily's mind. She called facilities. "Do you keep door access logs by room?" "Generally," came the answer. "But you'll need a request with the court administrator." She filed it and sent chocolate to the admin's assistant, because journalism is half ethics and half hospitality. While she waited, she worked juror angles that weren't doors or cars. She replayed the trial in her head. Day 4. Monroe introduced a bland city procurement analyst whose testimony landed like drywall. 12 sets of eyes glazed, except juror 12, who perked up, then glanced there, was again toward Conference B as the bailiff shifted near. The door. Day 5. A defense email exhibit didn't load. The judge called a 5-minute break, and when everyone returned, the court reporter announced a clarification to the limiting instruction that just happened to narrow Rhea Parks. Cross. Clarifications like that don't materialize without whispers. She wrote the sentence in her notebook anyway. Whose whispers? The door log reply landed the next morning at 9:02 a.m. An Excel file attached to a polite email from court administration. Emily opened it and felt the small jolt that keeps reporters in a dying industry. A pattern nobody had bothered to hide because nobody had thought anyone would ask. Conference B's badge reader showed standard traffic judge, clerks, IT until the week of State v. Halle. Then, 3 evenings in a row, an access credential labeled O Bailiff 2 pinged Conference B at 6:41. 6:57 and 7:09 p.m., 30 seconds later, the juror Corber reader pinged. And 3 minutes after that, the exterior camera at the side entrance, time since to facilities server, caught a black Suburban idling at the curb. "Oh, Bailiff 2, she murmured, printing the log. "Who the hell are you?" she called the bailiff's supervisor. "We staff from a pool," he said carefully. "Auxiliaries don't always hit payroll. They're Tong with badges." "That open Conference B?" "Ma'am, is this a records request?" "It's a conversation." "Then it's over," he said, and hung up. Sanjay drifted over as she circled times and read. "Tell me you have more than vibes." "I have a door log, a garage pattern, a juror choreography problem, an attempt with a master key." He groaned. "Legal will want affidavits tattooed on our foreheads. Can you find a human who will put their name to something?" As if on cue, Emily's phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She answered and heard nothing for a beat but breathing. Then, "You're the reporter." From the back row, female voice, mid-30s, not juror 3, but close. "I didn't give you my number," Emily said softly. "No," the woman said, "but I took yours from the paper because I need to tell someone that this didn't feel right." Emily rolled her chair toward the glassed-in huddle room and closed the door. "You can hang up any time," she said, "but if you're calling because you want something on the record, we'll do it carefully. If you're calling because you need to clear your head, I'll listen. Either way, we'll protect you as much as the law lets us." The woman exhaled, a sound like a blown match. "They told us not to talk to anyone," she said. "I won't give you my name." "Not yet, but I'll tell you this. A court officer walked us to a room 2 nights after closing arguments and said the judge wanted to remind us about instructions. The judge wasn't there. A man in a suit was. He said we were doing our civic duty and that sometimes the city needs closure. He said the evidence was complicated, but the law was clear. He said reasonable doubt isn't any doubt." Emily's pen scratched the page, furious. Did he identify himself? No. He had a pocket square and a lapel pin. He smelled like expensive soap. Was he from the DA's office? He didn't say, but the bailiff nodded like he belonged. "And after that?" "After that," the woman said, voice tightening. Every time the one juror who kept asking questions opened her mouth, the foreman cut her off. He said we were overthinking. He said the city can't afford mistrials. He said a lot of things that sounded like he'd been practicing. Emily let the silence stretch so the woman could hear her own courage. "Why are you calling me?" she asked. "Because my kid asked me last night what reasonable doubt means," the woman said. "And I told him it means you can sleep after you send someone away. I haven't slept. Does that answer your question?" "It does," Emily said. "Can we meet?" "Somewhere public. You can keep your name for now." "Not yet," the woman said. "But check who O Bailiff 2 is. And check who signs the juror meal vouchers. We didn't get deli. We got trays, and the trays came with notes." "Notes?" "Little cards. Thank you for your service to the city." The seal was raised. I kept one. "Will you send me a picture?" A pause, then the soft click of a camera app. The photo landed in Emily's inbox 30 seconds later. A linen-textured card with an embossed city, seal and a message in block font, unsigned. The city didn't send those. Emily knew because she'd covered the budget hearing when they cut the hospitality line item last fall. Someone with money and access had filled the gap. "Thank you," Emily said. "If anything happens, if anyone approaches you, call me. Then call the judge's chambers." "I won't call the court," the woman said flatly. If they wanted to stop it, they would have. The line went dead. Emily sat very still. Through the glass, the newsroom moved in its ceaseless shuffle, but the story had locked onto her now like a hand around the wrist. She printed the photo, taped it above her desk next to the door-logged Times, and drew a line between them. In bold she wrote, "Who buys juries with courtesy?" That night, she walked past the courthouse on purpose. The building looked the way all American courthouses look after dark like a promise you're not sure the country can keep. A janitor pushed a wheeled trash bin across the marble, whistling off-key, and a deputy with a thermos watched her without seeing. Emily stood on the sidewalk under the glow of a street lamp and thought about the first rule we teach jurors, and the last one we mean. Don't talk to anyone about the case. But jurors talk to themselves. They talk to their fear of getting it wrong. They talk to the desire to be done. And if someone with the right badge and the right phrases steps into the gap between law and fatigue, it doesn't feel like a crime. It feels like help. Help is how Rot starts. She pulled out her notebook and wrote the opening of the story she would file as soon as she had one more brick. In a city that prides itself on clean hands, someone found a way to dirty a verdict without leaving fingerprints. In the morning, she would ask procurement, who had printed embossed cards with the city seal that procurement swore the city hadn't ordered. She would ask the court administrator which temp agency supplied O Bay Leaf 2 and why that credential opened a door that should have stayed shut. She would ask Ada Monroe for comment and record every no as a syllable in the word refusal. And if she was right, if the juror's rhythm had a metronome, she would ask the only question that mattered, on the record, to the people in charge of the building where the law lives. Who bought your verdict? Then she went home to a studio that smelled like takeout and old books and watched the foreman's face on replay until she could see the moment he shifted from citizen to conductor. She set 3 alarms. She dreamed of a door-marked conference. B and a lapel pin shaped like a promise you can't trust. And when she woke, she didn't doubt the danger or the size of the thing she was about to push. She only wondered how expensive truth would be this time, and whether the city was willing to pay. Emily Ward didn't wait for dawn to sharpen her lead. She sat in her studio apartment at 3 in the morning, her laptop screen glowing against walls lined with cheap IKEA bookshelves, and scrolled through the photo the anonymous juror had sent her. She kept zooming in, tracing the embossed city seal, the linen texture, the raised ink. It was clean work too clean for city print jobs, which usually smeared like someone had ordered toner by the ounce. She'd covered enough budget meetings to know that last quarter, the county cut stationery contracts down to bare minimum. No way the city printed these thank you cards, which meant someone else did. She pulled up the vendor contracts archived. From procurement hearings, matching fonts and seals, cross-checking logos like a forger in reverse. Nothing. Whoever had paid for those cards didn't want their name attached. And yet, here was the card in her inbox. That was evidence, even if it wouldn't hold in court. Yet dot at 9 sharp, she was in the newsroom, hair pulled back in a ponytail, notebook already full of scribbles. Sanjay was nursing his coffee when she dropped the printout of the card on his desk. "Tell me that looks municipal," she said. He squinted, rubbed his eyes, and shook his head. "That looks like campaign stationery, political consultant grade. Someone who spends real money to look like they don't have to." "Exactly." She slid the door log printout next to it. "And here's a badge that shouldn't exist. Opening doors it shouldn't open." Sanjay groaned. "This is more than a sidebar, Ward. You know that, right? If you're right, this is page 1. 3 weeks running and subpoenas flying." Emily leaned in. "If I'm right, we just watched a verdict get purchased wholesale. How do you want history to record that? That we printed the prosecutor's sound bites while the jury got sold in the back room?" Sanjay pinched his nose. "All right, chase it. But don't you dare put the words bought jury in print until we've got documents stacked taller than me. You get me patterns, you get me names, you get me one human being willing to go on record, and we go nuclear." Emily spent the rest of the day digging through court expense reports. Juries get stipends, meal allowances, mileage reimbursement. It's all filed, all public. Most jurors claim lunch at the courthouse deli or a sandwich shop across the street. But this panel? They had vouchers for catered trays from a place called Garnet Catering filed under miscellaneous expenses. Garnet wasn't on the approved vendor list. Garnet, in fact, was a name Emily knew. It was owned by a shell corporation tied to a PAC that had quietly supported Victor Hale's real estate projects years ago. Her pulse quickened. She called Garnet Catering, pretending to be from a law firm needing a quote. A man with a smoker's rasp answered, said they did special deliveries, courthouse included. When she pressed for menu options, he said, "Whatever the client requests. They pay, we serve." Don't matter who eats it. She hung up, heart racing. Somebody had been feeding the jurors both food and messages, and they'd used a company with just enough political history to make her stomach turn. That night, she parked across from the courthouse in her beat-up Honda Civic, watching the side entrance with a thermos of stale coffee. At 7:02 p.m., a black Suburban pulled up. She focused her zoom lens and snapped shots as a man in a tailored suit with a lapel pin guided two figures into the side door jurors. She was almost sure, though she couldn't make out their faces, under the streetlight glare. 3 minutes later, O Bailiff 2's badge ping would be logged, she guessed. She felt the click of the camera like a second heartbeat. Now she had time, photos, and logs beginning to line up. But then the hairs on her neck prickled. Across the street, a sedan idled with its lights off. A figure in the driver's seat lifted something that glinted. Camera? Binoculars? Emily lowered her lens slowly and pretended to scroll her phone. 10 minutes later, the Suburban left. The sedan followed half a block behind, and Emily drove home with every nerve singing. Someone knew she was watching. The next morning, she filed a fresh public records request for O Bailiff 2. The clerk gave her the same stonewall answer. Temporary assignment, no payroll file. She smiled sweetly and said, "Then give me the temp agency contracts, every one of them." While she waited, she called Theo again. "Run the address on Garnet Catering's corporate filing." He chuckled. "You know it's a UPS store before I even type it. Humor me." He typed, Suite 118. And guess what? Same box that got campaign donations for a PAC called Citizens for Growth. Victor Hale's PAC, 3 years ago. Emily leaned back, adrenaline coursing. They didn't even hide it. They just rerouted the mailbox and trusted nobody would look. "Most don't," Theo said. "Most people just eat the food." By afternoon, she had a timeline taped above her desk. Day 3 of trial, garnet trays delivered. Day 4, first O Bailiff 2 entry. Day 5, second Suburban sighting. Layered on top, the verdict speed, the synchronized juror behavior, the embossed thank you cards. It was becoming a picture, and pictures tell stories louder than words. She needed one more brick of human 1.5. That evening, her burner phone buzzed. It was the anonymous juror again. "We need to meet," the woman whispered. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m. East Side Mall food court. Wear something red, so I know it's you." Emily agreed, pulse pounding. She spent the night pacing her apartment, half writing, half praying the source wouldn't spook. But morning brought more than nerves. It brought a manila envelope slid under her newsroom desk. No return address. Inside, photocopies of 3 bank statements. Each showed deposits in round numbers. $5,000, $7,500, $10,000 into accounts that matched juror names she recognized from voir dire. Deposits made during trial week. One was from Garnet Consulting, LLC. Emily's breath caught. This was it. The first hard proof money had moved. She showed Sanjay. He swore, low and fierce. "This is dynamite, but it's also a death wish. Whoever slipped this knows you're on the scent. And if they know your desk, they know your name." Emily felt the cold bloom in her gut, but said, "Then I'd better move faster." That evening, she drove to East Side Mall, wore a red scarf, and sat in the food court under flickering fluorescent lights. Families trickled past with pretzels and sodas. At 8:07, the juror appeared, hood up, hands shaking. She slid into the booth without meeting Emily's eyes. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. Emily pushed her coffee across. "Nobody should, but you are." The juror's voice was hoarse. "They gave us the cards with the trays, and sometimes there were envelopes. Not stuffed, not obvious. Just folded sheets with numbers, like codes. I didn't take one, but I saw others did. Emily's hand trembled as she scribbled notes. Numbers? Routing numbers, maybe. Account numbers. I don't know. But I know one thing. When we came back from those nights, the foreman had lines ready. He said things like reasonable doubt doesn't mean imaginary doubt. He quoted case law he hadn't heard in court. She looked up, eyes haunted. He wasn't leading us. He was reciting. Emily swallowed hard. This wasn't just bribery. It was script writing. Someone had turned a jury box into actors, and the lines had been paid for. The juror grabbed Emily's hand. Don't use my name. Please, if they know I talked. Emily squeezed back. Then we make them afraid of the story, not you. When? She left them all. She noticed the same sedan from the courthouse idling near the exit, headlights off. She walked fast, slipped into the crowd, and ducked behind a delivery truck until it pulled away. Her pulse thundered, but her notebook throbbed. Heavier in her bag. She had voices, photos, logs, money. And now she had a decision. Publish soon and risk half-built scaffolding, or wait for the full skeleton and risk the story being buried. She stood in the parking lot under the buzzing sodium lamps, staring at the horizon of her city, the courthouse. Spire cut the night sky, proud and false. She whispered to herself, who buys a verdict and thinks nobody will count the change? She didn't have the answer yet. But Chapter 2 closed with the sense that the answer was closer than ever. And so was the danger. Emily Ward had always told herself that fear was just data and other input you could measure, catalog, and eventually tame. But the morning after her clandestine meeting with the juror at East Side Mall, fear had taken on a different texture. It wasn't just the flutter in her chest when she replayed the juror's trembling words about envelopes and scripts. It was the silence of her phone when Sanjay didn't answer, the dead bolt on her apartment door that suddenly looked flimsy, the way the sedan's headlights flared in her dreams every time she closed her eyes. She sat at her desk in the newsroom. At 10 a.m., coffee cooling untouched, the manila envelope of bank statements hidden in her bag, and felt every head turned toward her, even though nobody was looking. She forced herself to type. A draft. In the trial of real estate mogul Victor. How jurors may have received unauthorized perks. She stopped there, hands frozen. May have was safe, but it felt like a betrayal of the juror who had risked everything to whisper in a food court. She backspaced, stared at the blinking cursor, and muttered, "What does it cost to write the truth?" Sanjay appeared at her cubicle, jaw tight. "We need to talk." He gestured toward the small glassed-in conference room. She followed, clutching her notebook like a shield. Inside, he shut the door and lowered his voice. "You've been asking. Questions in places that don't like questions." He slid a folded sheet across the table. It was a letterhead memo, the ink sharp, the words cold. From legal. They want you to slow down. Anonymous sources aren't enough. Financial records without authentication aren't enough. They're worried about liability, defamation suits, retaliation. Emily scanned the memo, bile rising. So they want me to sit on evidence of a rigged jury because someone might get upset? Sanjay met her glare. They want us to not get bankrupted. There's a difference. Emily leaned forward. Last night, my source told me they were handed envelopes. I have logs, photos, a catering trail to a pack, bank deposits. This isn't smoke. This is fire. Sanjay pinched the bridge of his nose. And if you're wrong, it's career suicide. If you're right, it's worse. Because people who can buy a jury can buy a lot more than that. Emily's voice hardened. Then let them try. My job isn't to be comfortable. It's to tell the city what's being stolen from under their nose. That night, she walked home from the train with her scarf pulled tight, every shadow a blade. She reached her apartment door and froze. The lock was scraped. Inside, the air felt disturbed, like someone had exhaled where they didn't belong. Nothing was missing. Laptop still on the desk. Books still stacked, but her drawer of notebooks had been rifled, pages bent. A sticky note was on her kitchen table. Just 3 words: stop or bleed. She sat down hard on the couch, hands shaking, reading the note over and over. The cheap ballpoint ink had smudged slightly, but the intent was sharp enough to cut. She photographed it, bagged it in a Ziploc, and then, against every instinct, poured herself a whiskey. The next morning she handed the photo to Sandri. He went pale. "Police?" he asked. Emily shook her head. If the police were going to help, they wouldn't be guarding Conference B. He swore under his breath. "You're in over your head." She stared at him. "Then come in with me, or get out of my way." She doubled her pace. Calls to the temp agency led nowhere. 3 different offices claimed never to have supplied an Old Bailiff 2. She tracked down an ex-bailiff who had quit 2 years earlier. He agreed to meet in a diner, greasy coffee between them. "Oxes are ghosts," he said. "They get temp IDs from upstairs, walk the halls like they belong. No payroll, no trail. You ever see one, you remember. They don't look like cops. They look like consultants." Emily pressed. "Consultants for who?" He smirked. "Whoever pays their retainer." By day 3, her nerves were stripped raw. The sedan appeared again outside the courthouse, tinted windows black. She snapped a photo of the plate, sent it to Theo. Hours later, he pinged back. Rental, paid in cash. Another dead end. Another invisible hand. She scribbled in her notebook. They're everywhere and nowhere. Sleep became impossible. Every creak in her apartment was a footstep. Every buzz of her phone a threat. She showered with the door locked, carried mace in her coat pocket, kept her recorder on at all times. And yet, beneath the fear, something harder grew. Not defiance exactly, but resolve. If they were trying this hard to scare her off, then she was closer to the heart of the story than she'd ever been in her career. She repeated the jurors' words like a mantra. After that, the foreman had lines ready. Someone had written those lines. Someone had bought those voices. And until she wrote it down, the city would never know how justice had been traded like currency dot late one night. She returned to her apartment to find an envelope taped to her door. No address, no name. Inside was a single Polaroid, her leaving. The newsroom, red scarf wrapped around her neck. On the back, last warning. She closed her eyes, pulse pounding, and whispered, "Not good enough." Because Chapter 3 wasn't about retreat. It was about the moment Emily understood that the cost of the story wasn't fear, or even blood. It was everything. And she was willing to pay it if it meant pulling the curtain back on the people who thought verdicts were just another commodity. The week after the Polaroid, Emily learned what it meant to work in the shadows of her own city. She still filed daily stories, routine crime briefs, development squabbles, the kind of ink her paper needed to survive, but her real work lived. In the margins, the late-night calls to the county clerk, the FOIA requests disguised as harmless data pulls, the endless interviews with anyone who had brushed against the courthouse. She'd turned her apartment into a war room, yellow notes plastered to the wall, strings of connections that looked less like conspiracy theory and more like accounting. It wasn't paranoia if the numbers lined up, and the numbers were finally starting to speak. At 8:14 on a Tuesday morning, Theo slid a flash drive across her desk like it was contraband. "Payroll dump," he whispered. "Temp agencies, 2 years' worth. Don't ask how." She nodded and plugged it in, scrolling through hundreds of contracts, line items that blurred together until one stopped her cold. Agency ID number 47B, vendor. Name Judicial Support Solutions, LLC. Contract approved 6 months ago. Purpose listed as auxiliary bailiff coverage. Billing address. Same UPS store as Garnet Catering. She sat back, pulse racing. A temp agency that didn't exist outside of a mailbox. She cross-referenced the contract against her door logs and felt her hands shake. Every date, oh bailiff. 2 inches appeared. Judicial Support Solutions had billed the county for after-hours escort service. It was right there, in black and white, as if corruption had become so routine it didn't even bother hiding anymore. She printed copies, spread them across her desk, and snapped photos for backup. But it wasn't just paperwork now. A source. Inside procurement called her that afternoon, voice low, words clipped. "They're sniffing around," he said. "Someone knows you've been pulling logs?" My supervisor asked why the press suddenly cares about auxiliary contracts. "If you're smart, you'll let it drop." Emily asked, "Why tell me this?" The man exhaled. "Because my wife's on jury duty next month. I don't want her future bought out from under her." Then he hung up, leaving Emily staring at the receiver. That night she walked to her car and saw another envelope on the windshield. Inside was a catering invoice photocopy, faint lines, but it listed service, jury meal trays, Courtroom 4B, and client, confidential. In the notes column, special delivery approved by A.D. Monroe's office. Her heart stopped. Was it real? A forgery? She looked around the empty parking lot, felt the weight of unseen eyes, and shoved the paper into her bag. She scanned it under a desk lamp at home, tracing Monroe's office code at the bottom. If this was genuine, the prosecutor wasn't just ignoring tampering his office, was signing the receipts. She wanted to call Sanjay, but when she arrived at the newsroom the next morning, he was already waiting. "Ward," he said, tone clipped. "Legal had another meeting. You're attracting fire." He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside was a letter, formal, threatening, stamped. A law firm representing interested parties was accusing the paper of malicious speculation in her preliminary drafts. "They know what I'm working on," Emily said, voice hollow. Sanjay rubbed his temples. "No, they know enough to scare you, and me, and the publisher." Emily shoved the temp agency contract across the table. "Then let them be scared of this. Judicial Support Solutions isn't real. It's a mailbox. It's billing the county for ghost bailiffs that walk jurors into private rooms. And it shares an address with Garnet Catering, the same shell company that fed those jurors embossed cards. If we don't print this, who will?" Sanjay stared at the page, silent for a long beat, then sighed. "Get me 2 more documents that triangulate it, independent of each other. Then I'll take it upstairs. Until then, this stays in your notebook, not our paper." So she doubled down. She tracked meal vouchers through the county finance office, pulling records until her eyes blurred. Buried among them was a set of checks, not the standard $15 daily allowance, but $50 prepaid cards issued to juror services. Issued by a regional bank whose board had long-standing ties to Victor Hale's developments. The pattern was unmistakable. Inflated stipends funneled through legitimate channels, disguised as generosity. She photographed them all, labeled every file. But even patterns didn't protect her from the weight pressing in. That night, she returned to her apartment to find the hallway dark, the exit sign flickering. Her neighbor, an old woman who watered plants at midnight, whispered as Emily unlocked her door. There was a man waiting here earlier. Said he was maintenance. Never seen him before. Inside, she found her bathroom window cracked open, latch broken. She searched every corner, recorder clutched in her fist, but nothing was missing. Just another message. We can come and go as we please. She slept with the lights on, a baseball bat by the bed, knowing sleep wouldn't come. The next morning, she forced herself into the courthouse like nothing was wrong. Ada Monroe was giving a press conference on Hale's sentencing, cameras flashing, words polished. Emily pushed forward, recorder high. "Mr. Monroe, can you comment on why jurors in Hale's trial received catered meals from a vendor tied to his pack?" His eyes flickered, just for a second. Then he smiled, bland as oatmeal. "The court manages juror meals. Our office doesn't." He moved on, but the cameras had caught the twitch, and Emily knew it. Later, a fellow reporter whispered, "Careful. You're making enemies in suits who've never lost." Emily replied, "Then it's time they did." That evening she opened her inbox to find another unsigned email. No subject line, no greeting, just a PDF attached. She hesitated, scanned it on a burner laptop, heart pounding. It was a memo from court administration. Conference room B reserved, 7 p.m. special. Instructions. Under participants, O bailiff 2+ selected jurors. She leaned back in her chair, adrenaline buzzing. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't fear. This was the skeleton she'd been building, now given flesh. Still, as she stared at the screen, she couldn't shake the image of the open window, the sticky note, the Polaroid. Someone was tightening a net around her, the same way they had around the jurors. She was no longer just an observer. She was a participant in the story. And if she was right, if these ghosts in suits had truly bought a verdict, they wouldn't hesitate to buy silence too. But Emily wasn't for sale. Not now. Not ever. Emily stared at the PDF memo until the lines blurred and the words became a single accusation burning into her retinas. Conference room B reserved, 7 p.m. Special instructions. Under participants, O bailiff 2+ selected jurors. She had written enough about bureaucracy to know the weight of stamped, official memos. They were the bones of government, the quiet evidence that nobody ever expected to see daylight. And now she had one in her hands, anonymous source or not. She forwarded it to her burner, printed 2 copies, and hid them in different places. One at her apartment, taped beneath a drawer, another folded into the lining of her winter coat. She was learning quickly. Never keep all your truth in one place. At the newsroom the next morning, she found Sanjay already in her chair, spinning slightly, holding the catering invoice she had left on his desk the night before. He looked tired, hair messy, eyes bloodshot. "Where the hell did you get this?" he demanded, waving the paper. Emily slid into her seat. It showed up. Same with this. She laid the PDF memo on the desk. His eyes widened. "You're telling me court administration is reserving private rooms for jurors after hours with escorts who don't exist on payroll?" "I'm telling you they put it in writing," she said. He rubbed his face. "Christ. Ward, do you understand what this means? This isn't just a shady defense team buying influence. This has the fingerprints of the prosecutor's office. Maybe even the court itself." Emily met his eyes. "Then we print it." Sanjay shook his head. "Not yet. Not without cross-confirmation. Do you realize what happens if we accuse the DA's office of fixing a jury and miss by an inch? They'll sue us into dust. They'll destroy your career. And mine. And this paper." Emily leaned forward. "Then you help me nail it down tighter. One more document, one more voice, one more step. That's all I need." He sighed deeply, like a man watching the ocean swallow his boat. "You're going to get yourself killed," she shrugged. "Better me than the truth." By mid-afternoon, Emily's inbox was a graveyard of denials. Facilities claimed no knowledge of room reservations. Court administration could not locate the memo she already had. The DA's office ignored her emails. The silence was louder than lies. Around 4, her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. We see you. Attached was a grainy photo of her leaving the diner 2 nights earlier, the ex-bailiff across from her. She deleted it quickly, bile rising, but the message was clear. They were watching every step, every source. She walked to the ladies' room, locked herself in a stall, and steadied her breathing. Fear had a weight, and she couldn't let it crush her. She had to turn it into fuel. That night, she went back to her apartment and pored over the bank statements again. The deposits lined up perfectly with the days the jury received catered meals. Garnet Consulting LLC funneled money into 3 juror accounts, always just under the threshold that would trigger federal currency transaction reports. It wasn't coincidence. It was laundering. She imagined the jurors opening their statements, seeing the numbers, maybe convincing themselves it was some administrative error, some government generosity. Maybe they told themselves everyone got one. But Emily knew better. Bribes rarely arrive in brown envelopes these days. They arrive with routing numbers and online transfers, sterile and cold as a digital handshake. She printed enlarged copies, pinned them above her desk, and drew arrows. Catering gives pack, gives jurors. She labeled it the circuit. It looked like a diagram for a crime syndicate, and maybe it was. Only this one wore suits and sat in chambers. On Thursday morning, she decided to test the water. She wrote a draft story. Records obtained. By the Herald suggest that jurors in the trial of Victor Hale were provided with catered meals from a vendor linked to Hale's own political network. Additional documents point to after-hours meetings between jurors and unidentified court officers. She kept the language cautious, stuffed with suggest and allege, but the heart of it was undeniable. She printed it and handed it to Sanjay. He read silently, lips pressed thin. "You know what this is?" he asked finally. She nodded. "The truth." He shook his head. "No, it's a grenade. And once we pull the pin, there's no taking it back." He folded the draft, tucked it into his folder, and whispered, "Give me 2 days. Let me talk to legal, see if they'll back us if we go to print. Until then, keep your head down." 2 days felt like 2 years. Emily filled the hours with phone calls that went nowhere, dead ends piling up. One juror she tried to contact slammed the phone down the moment she introduced herself. Another source warned her bluntly, "Stop calling people, Ward. You're making noise. Noise gets silenced." She hung up, heart pounding, and knew the net was tightening. That Friday night, she returned to her apartment to find her front door ajar. She froze, adrenaline spiking. She slid her recorder out of her pocket, thumb on the button, and pushed inside. The lights were off. Her notes were scattered across the floor, drawers pulled open, files rifled. On her desk sat her laptop, screen cracked, keys ripped out. And in the middle of the wreckage was a single object, the stuffed rabbit her source's daughter had clutched. At the food court, Emily's blood went cold. They had been in her apartment, and they had stolen more than papers. They had taken a piece of innocence, placed it on her desk like a signature. She called Sanjay, voice shaking. "They broke in. They left me a message." He cursed. "Jesus, Emily, go to the cops." She laughed bitterly. "The cops? The bailiffs? The DA? They're part of this. Who am I supposed to run to?" There was silence on the line, then his voice softened. "Then run to me. Bring what you have. Tonight." She gathered her copies, stuffed them into her bag, and drove across the city with her headlights off, heart pounding at every turn. She arrived at Sanjay's small apartment, a 2-story walk-up that smelled of curry and cigarettes. He opened the door, pulled her inside, and locked it. "Show me everything," he said. She spread the documents across his kitchen table temp contracts, catering invoices, bank statements, the memo. He paced, muttering under his breath, "This is enough. This has to be enough." Emily watched him, chest tight. "So we print?" He looked at her, eyes full of conflict. "We print if legal doesn't gut me. But if they won't, then you leak it." She froze. "Leak it?" He nodded. "To someone bigger. Times, Post, Hell, even ProPublica. They'll run it if we can't. But Ward understands something. If you do this, your life doesn't go back. Ever. You'll have enemies in places you don't even know exist. And they won't forgive." Emily looked at the rabbit on the table, at the bank statements, at the memo that glared like truth itself. She whispered, "I'd rather be hunted than silent." At that moment, she realized the story wasn't about Victor Hawley anymore. It wasn't about one verdict. It was about a system that had turned justice into a commodity. And she was the only one who had put the pieces together. That weight was terrifying, but it was also liberating. She left Sanjay's apartment near midnight, streets empty, city asleep. She walked under the courthouse spire once more, the stone glowing under street lamps, and whispered to herself, "You bought the jury, but you didn't buy me." Emily woke the next morning with a taste of adrenaline still bitter on her tongue. The stuffed rabbit sat on her desk like an omen, its button eyes reflecting the pale morning light that seeped through the blinds. She hadn't slept just. Sat there, staring, scribbling fragments of thought into her notebook until her handwriting turned to scratches. By 7, she was back at the newsroom, coffee in hand, eyes bloodshot but determined. Sanjay was already there, pacing outside Legal's office with a folder clutched to his chest. He spotted her and shook his head. "They're stalling," he muttered. "They don't want to touch it. Too hot." Emily clenched her fists. "They can't stall forever. We have documents. We have sources. We have enough to run it." Sanjay's mouth twisted. "Maybe. But they're scared, Ward. Not of being wrong, of being right. If we run this and it sticks, it brings down the DA's office, the court, maybe the city council. That's not just a story. That's a war." Emily's jaw tightened. "Then maybe it's time someone declared one." She spent the day chasing shadows. She visited the records annex again, but the clerk who had been helpful last week suddenly refused to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "That file's restricted." "Restricted since when?" she demanded. "Since yesterday." She left empty-handed, fury pounding in her chest. At lunch, she ducked into a diner near the Chi courthouse. As she sipped burnt coffee, she noticed a man 2 booths over, pretending to read a newspaper but never turning the page. When she paid and left, he left too. He followed her half a block before disappearing into a parking garage. She texted, "Theo, check if newsroom phones are tapped. Something's leaking." He replied 2 minutes later, "Already assumed they are." Switch to burners only. Her skin prickled. That meant someone in her own building could be feeding her moves. To the same people she was chasing. Back at her desk, she found an envelope waiting. No return address again. Inside, a single piece of paper with bold black letters. "The next story you write will be your last." Her breath hitched. She glanced around the newsroom. Reporters typed, phones rang, the world carried on. Nobody looked her way. But someone had walked into her sanctuary, her workplace, and left a death threat on her chair like a post-it note. She slid it into her folder, forcing herself not to tremble. That evening, Sanjay called her into his office. He closed the door, his face gray with fatigue. "Legal says no," he said flatly. Emily blinked. "No?" He rubbed his temples. "They won't run it. Too much liability. Too much blowback. They want you to drop it. Move on. Cover city council budget hearings instead." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "They want me to write about potholes while juries are being bought." "In conference rooms?" Sanjay winced. Ward, I believe you. I do, but the paper won't take the hit. They're already drowning in lawsuits and debt. If they go up against the DA's office and lose, we're done. Emily's chest tightened. So that's it? We just let it happen? Pretend justice isn't for sale? He looked at her with a mix of sorrow and resignation. You want the truth out? Find another way. Leak it, earn it, do what you have to. But not here, not under our masthead. She walked out numb, her ears roaring. At her desk, she stared at the wall of notes. The arrows connecting temp agencies, catering invoices, bank deposits. Years of her life had led to this moment. And now her own institution, the one that had trained her, fed her, given her a byline, was cutting her loose. She packed her files into her bag and left without a word. That night, she sat in her apartment, with the lights off, staring at the glowing screen of her burner laptop. A blank email draft blinked at her. To nationaldesk@nytimes.com. To investigations@propublica.org. To metro@washpost.com. Her finger hovered over the keys. One click and the story would leave her hands. One click and the storm would begin. But something held her back. Not fear, exactly something colder. Doubt. If she leaked it now, half done, would it be buried as a conspiracy theory? Would the powerful bury it before it saw light? She needed one more blow. One undeniable piece that would force the world to listen. Her phone buzzed. It was Theo. Got something, he said, voice urgent. Meet me. Now, don't bring your car. Don't use your phone. Alley behind the Herald in 10. She shoved on her coat and slipped into the night, heart hammering. She found him under a flickering streetlight, hoodie up, a flash drive in his hand. Payroll data from Judicial Support Solutions, he whispered. Guess what? It doesn't just bill the county. It bills private clients too, including Victor Hale's law firm. Emily's breath caught. You're kidding. He shook. His head. I traced the shell. Money flows from Hale's firm to the shell, from the shell to the county, from the county to Auxiliary Bailiff 2. It's a perfect laundering loop. They're paying themselves to rig their own trial. She grabbed. The drive pulse racing. This is it. This is the nail. He nodded grimly. Then be careful. I'm pretty sure I was followed pulling this. You're not the only one on their radar. Emily clutched the drive all the way home, her hands slick with sweat. She loaded. The files watched the transactions march across her screen. It was undeniable. The jury hadn't just been tampered with. It had been purchased wholesale by the very people sitting at the defense table. It was corruption in its purest, boldest form, documented in black and white. She sat back, heart pounding, and whispered to herself, You bought the verdict. But I just bought your silence. But silence was exactly what they wanted from her. At midnight, she heard a knock on her door. 3 sharp raps. She froze, every nerve screaming. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The knock came again, louder this time. Then silence. She waited 10 minutes before daring to peek through the peephole. The hallway was empty, except for a single object lying on the floor. A cartridge casing, brass glinting under the dim light. A message, not subtle. She picked it up with trembling fingers, bagged it, and sat down on the couch. She couldn't call the cops. She couldn't call Sanjay. She couldn't call anyone. She was on her own, but she wasn't broken. As dawn crept through the blinds, she gathered her notes, her flash drive, her burner phone. She opened a new document and began to type not a draft for the Herald, not a cautious lawyer piece, but the raw story. Names, dates, money, threats, a blueprint of corruption. The truth, finally. She typed until her fingers cramped, Until the city outside stirred awake. Until she knew she had written something that couldn't be ignored. She saved it, encrypted it, copied it to 3 drives. She slipped one into her coat, one into her bag, one into a hollowed-out book on her shelf. If they came for her, the story would still live. If they silenced her, the truth would still speak. She leaned back, exhausted, staring at the words on her screen, and she whispered, "Now it's your turn to be afraid." Emily woke with a splitting headache and the metallic taste of adrenaline that hadn't faded since the cartridge casing appeared at her door. The drives sat on her desk, each labeled with black marker Truth 1, TRUT2, Truth 3 like talismans. She prayed would outlive her if she didn't. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the city outside was still hushed, but her mind was racing. She had enough now. The payroll loop tying Hale's law firm to judicial support solutions, the catering invoices, the bank deposits, the memo from court administration. One story, one hard document might be dismissed as rumor, but all of it together? It was undeniable. It was dynamite. And dynamite only mattered if you lit the fuse. She pulled her laptop closer and opened her email. The draft she'd typed the night before glared back at her 4,200 words of raw accusation. She added the attachments, scans of the memo, bank statements, payroll files. Her cursor hovered over the send button, addressed to 3 national outlets. But her finger froze. Sanjay's voice echoed in her head. "If you do this, your life doesn't go back. Ever." She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and clicked. The message whooshed into the ether, and for a moment she felt hollow, like she had just thrown herself off a building, but relief didn't last. By 9 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake." 30 seconds later, another, a photo of her building, shot from across the street. She slammed her laptop shut, heart hammering, and pulled the blinds closed. Whoever they weren't bluffing. They were watching, waiting. She grabbed her bag, stuffed one of the drives inside, and bolted out the back door. She didn't head to the newsroom. She couldn't risk it. Instead, she walked aimlessly through downtown until she ducked into a crowded coffee shop. She ordered something she wouldn't drink, sat at a corner table, and forced herself to breathe at 11. Sanjay called. His voice was tight, clipped. "Ward, we need to talk. Now." She almost hung up, fear prickling her skin. "What's wrong?" He hesitated. "Just come in. Trust me." Against her better judgment, she returned to the newsroom. The minute she walked through the glass doors, she knew something was wrong. The air was thick, heads turned, conversations halted mid-sentence. Sanjay was waiting at her desk, folder in hand. He motioned her into his office, shut the door, and dropped the folder onto the table. Inside was a letter with her name at the top. "Effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave pending review of conduct." Emily stared, stunned. "You're suspending me?" Sanjay looked pained. "Not me. Upper management. They're claiming you violated protocols, mishandled sources, compromised the paper's integrity." "Ward, they know you sent it out." Her stomach dropped. "The leak?" His silence was answer enough. Her chest tightened. "Did you tell them?" His face flushed with anger. "Of course not, but someone did. Someone knew you bypassed us, and now they're using it as an excuse to shut you down." She wanted to scream, to smash the folder across the room. Instead, she whispered, "So that's it? I'm out?" Sanjay rubbed his temples. "Ward, I told you this would happen. They can't risk it. They're terrified. But listen to me, you're not wrong. You're just too loud. If you want this story to survive, you'll have to finish it outside." She left the building numb, her press badge burning in her pocket like a scar. She had lost her platform, her shield. But she hadn't lost the story. And as the day went on, signs began to surface that her leap had landed. At 3 p.m., ProPublica published an exclusive preliminary report on jury tampering allegations in the Hawley case, citing documents obtained from confidential sources. The Post and Times followed hours later with cautious blurbs. They didn't name her, but she saw her fingerprints in every line. Her heart raced. The fuse was lit, but retaliation was just as swift. That evening, Ada Monroe held a press conference. Cameras rolled as he dismissed the allegations as baseless conspiracy theories manufactured by disgruntled individuals. He called the documents forgeries, the accusations an attack on the integrity of our judicial system. Emily watched on a diner TV, fury boiling. Monroe's smile was polished, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else, fear, maybe, or calculation. He knew the story had teeth. That's why he was rushing to dull them by nightfall. Emily's phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, half sympathetic, half distant. One text hit harder than the rest. Careful who you trust. Not everyone is on your side. It came from an unknown number, but she knew the truth of it already. Someone inside her own circle had sold her out. Maybe it was someone in legal. Maybe someone in management. Maybe worse. She walked the streets until her feet ached, paranoia tightening around her throat. Every car idling at the curb felt like a threat. Every passerby seemed to glance too long. She ducked into a bookstore, hid between shelves, and tried to steady her breathing. Her reflection in the window startled her. Hollow eyes, hair matted, shoulders hunched. She looked like a fugitive, not a reporter. And maybe she was both now. At midnight, her burner buzzed with a call. She answered, voice shaking. A distorted voice spoke. You think you've won? You've just written your own obituary. Walk away, Ward, or next time it's not a casing. It's a bullet. The line clicked dead. She sat in silence, phone pressed to her ear, tears stinging her eyes. For the first time, the reality of death pressed down on her. But then she thought of the juror's trembling voice, the rabbit left on her desk, the open window in her apartment. Fear had been there, weapon from the start, and the only answer to fear was fire. The next morning, the city buzzed with whispers. Talk radio debated the reports. Bloggers dissected the documents. A local councilman tweeted, if these allegations are true, we need answers. The story was spreading, mutating, gaining momentum. Emily watched it unfold from the shadows. Exhausted but resolute. They had tried to silence her, to strip her badge, to smear her name. But the truth was out now, alive and crawling through the veins of the city. She smiled grimly, whispering to herself, now it's your turn to run. By the time the morning shows began parroting the words, alleged jury tampering, the city felt tilted a few degrees off true north. Like a picture frame everyone noticed was crooked, but nobody reached up to fix. Emily watched the crawl on. A diner TV from a booth she'd claimed as a temporary office, burner laptop open. One of the truth drives in her jacket pocket, where she could feel its edge against her ribs. ProPublica's piece had dropped first, then follow-ons from the Post and the Times, each using different verbs: allege, suggest, indicate, but circling the same nouns she'd spent weeks digging up. Judicial Support Solutions, LLC, Garnet Catering. After-hours conference rooms. Juror deposits that made no sense unless you stopped pretending they did. The phone numbers she still dared to use started buzzing. A civil rights group wanted to talk. A state senator's chief of staff asked for context. A woman from a victims advocacy nonprofit tearfully told her, if juries can be bought, everything we've done is ash. One number made her sit up. A national investigative reporter with a voice like a scalpel. Nina Cho, she said, I read your files. Let me help you carry this. We have lawyers who like punching uphill. Emily stared out the diner window. At the courthouse spire. I'm radioactive, she said. Perfect, Nina replied. Radiation kills cancer? They met 2 hours later in a public park where parents pushed strollers and the city pretended not to be on fire. Nina wore a gray beanie and no fear. She laid out her triage like a battle plan. Lock down document provenance, duplicate storage in multiple jurisdictions, get a sworn affidavit from the juror who had called, and force an on-the-record flinch from someone who mattered. You don't win these with whispers, she said. You win by asking a question with a file number baked into it. Emily thought of Monroe's flat smile and the way it had twitched when she'd asked about Trey's. He hates details, she said. Then make him eat one, Nina replied. They split the stack. Nina took the payroll loop, tying Hale's firm to the shell. Emily took the catering invoices and the court memo. As they worked, the city started humming with something that wasn't quite belief yet, but wasn't disbelief either. Talk radio turned from dismissal to outrage in a single segment. A council member called for an independent inquiry, which, in City Hall dialect, meant, I want to be seen caring. Outside the courthouse, a dozen people became 50, holding handmade signs juries aren't for sale. You can't buy verdicts, voices cracking as they chanted. Emily kept her distance, hooed up, but she let the sound soak into her bones, like proof she wasn't screaming into a void. That afternoon, an email popped into her burner from an address that looked like a keyboard smash. Subject, W9. Attachment, a scan of a vendor form for Judicial Support Solutions, LLC. Contractor name Colin Bragg, SSN redacted. Signature block signed by Court Administration Deputy Miles Key. Nina whistled when Emily forwarded it. You're human, she said. Bragg's your O-bailiff too, and Key's the internal hand. Emily's pulse jumped. Bragg, a name she could put a face to if she could find one. She wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it to the inside of her pocket where her fingers could worry the edges. She texted Theo, run Colin Bragg against contractor IDs. 10 minutes later, retired deputy marshal. Private security for Hale's firm last year. Address on file is a mailbox. Surprise. Emily let the tiny victory bloom and then smothered it with caution. Every step forward widened the target on her back. Late in the day, the anonymous juror finally called. Her voice was thinner than before. They came to my door, she said. A man with a badge I've never seen, and another in a suit. They said I signed confidentiality. They said talking to the press is a crime. Emily swallowed heat. It isn't, she said. Intimidation is? Meet me tonight. Church basement on West 9th, back entrance. There'll be people who can protect you. She hung up and called Nina, who called a civil rights attorney named Tariq Bowen and an inspector general investigator, whose voicemail message did not include her title. 30 minutes later, Alicia Mendez from the State Inspector General's office was on the line. Voice as careful as a bomb text. I want to see what you have, Alicia said. In person. No phones. If we touch this, it has to be airtight. At dusk, the church basement smelled like coffee and pledge and something like relief. Folding chairs, old hymnals, a poster about a canned food drive. Tariq arrived with a portable notary and the kind of calm that makes frightened people borrow. Alicia came last. No entourage, just a messenger bag and eyes that took in everything. The juror slipped in wearing a scarf and a look that said she'd come because she couldn't breathe if she didn't. Emily put the memo and the W-9 on the table and watched Alicia's face not move. Tariq slid the affidavit across to the juror and spoke softly about courage. We can seal your name, he said. We can ask a judge for protection. But the truth needs a spine. Be that. The juror's hands shook as she signed. The notary stamped. Something in the room shifted. The story had grown a backbone. As they were packing up, Alicia paused with her hand on the door. If this reaches a grand jury, she said, they'll come for every file you've ever touched and every person you've ever texted. Be clean. Be backed up. Be gone if you need to. Emily nodded. What about you? I don't get to be gone. Alicia said, so make it count. The next morning, the Herald made it count in the other direction. A leaked memo, likely the same hands that had slipped threats under Emily's door, appeared on a gossip blog, painting Emily as unstable, reckless, and obsessed, a liability who had endangered sources. The language stank of legal and management and fear. Sanjay called, his voice cracked. I didn't sign it, he said. I told them it was garbage. But they needed a villain who wasn't the D. Emily listened, jaw tight. You were in the room, she said, and you didn't walk out. Silence. I'm sorry, he said. I thought keeping my seat meant I could help. Maybe I can't. She hung up with a thank you that tasted like rust. Betrayal didn't always come with knives. Sometimes it wore a tie and called itself prudence. At noon, Monroe announced an emergency press availability. Nina smelled blood. We're going, she said, or asking with numbers. They stood near the front as cameras lined up. The courthouse steps a theater where truth and performance swapped lines. Monroe launched into his denial no credible evidence, irresponsible reporting, the sacredness of the jury system, and then Nina cut in, voice level, microphone high. Mr. Monroe, can you explain why invoice number 47B2219 from Judicial Support? Solutions bills the county for after-hours escort services on March 8th. The same night Conference Room B was reserved for special instructions. And why AW9 for your contractor? One Colin Bragg bears the signature of Deputy Miles. Key in court administration? For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. Monroe blinked. His mouth opened and closed before the script found him again. We don't comment on internal vendor paperwork, he said too quickly. Any suggestion of impropriety is the signature fake? Emily asked, stepping forward, adrenaline flushing away any tremor. Is Bragg not your contractor? Are the logs wrong? The murmurs rose. Cameras leaned. Monroe's jaw tightened. We are referring defamatory. Claims to counsel. He turned, and in the periphery, Emily saw him glance past the cameras toward a man in a tailored suit with a lapel pin shaped like a city seal. The man shook his head once, almost imperceptibly. Lapel pin. Emily filed the face and the gesture. Away like evidence with its own case number. The protest outside swelled. Someone shouted, "Answer the question." Someone else yelled, "How much is a verdict?" A bottle clinked on stone. Deputies pushed the crowd back, hands up, eyes scanning for a spark. As the press conference broke, the lapel pin man cut through the crush with the kind of glide that comes from never being told no. Emily stepped to intercept him. "Mr. Bragg?" she said, knowing from the instant flinch that she'd guessed right. He didn't answer. He put a shoulder into her like she was furniture. She stumbled, caught herself on a railing, and snapped a photo with her phone, because sometimes you don't need a perfect shot. You need proof a face existed in a place it shouldn't. He spun, grabbed for the phone, hissed, "Last chance." And that was the moment the crowd surged, a tangle of elbows and voices and the hot stink of fear. A hand shoved her from behind. Her knees cracked the stone. The phone skittered. A cop barked, "Back up." And somewhere the chant turned to a ragged cheer, because bystanders had their own phones, and a dozen angles recorded the man with the lapel pin lunging at a reporter. On courthouse steps, the video hit social feeds, before Emily had wiped the blood from her palms. She watched it loop on a stranger's screen while EMTS checked her pupils. Bragg moving like a handler whose puppet seized its strings. Monroe's eyes darting. The push, the grab. The way Bragg's hand went to his jacket, as if muscle memory had not yet learned cameras were everywhere. Within an hour, the clip trended. Within 2, a council member who'd never said her name before tweeted, "Violence against the press is unacceptable. Full investigation now." Within 3, Alicia texted a half sentence that read like a lifeline. "Stay by people. Don't go home." Emily didn't. She followed Nina to a co-working space with too much glass and not enough privacy, where they huddled with Tariq and mapped the next moves. The affidavit would go under seal with a judge Alicia trusted. The W-9 and invoice numbers would be submitted to the Inspector General with chain of custody letters. And Emily, suspended, smeared, bruised, would write an open letter to the city naming the pattern without naming the juror. "Give them the shape," Nina said. "Make them see the outline so when the names come, the picture snaps into focus." Emily wrote until her knuckles throbbed. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The facts were lurid enough. A fake agency billed the county to usher jurors into rooms they never should have seen. A catering firm with a pack pass fed them. Both calories and messages. Deposits hit accounts with a rhythm that matched court calendars. A retired deputy with a city pin handled escort services that looked nothing like safety. She ended with a question nobody could read without hearing the echo beneath it. If you can buy a verdict, what can't you buy? Dusk set the glass walls on fire. Somewhere in the building, a printer jammed and a kid laughed, and life went stubbornly on. Emily's phone buzzed with a final text before she turned it off for the night. Unknown number. You've done it now. She pictured the lapel pin turning between 2 fingers, the way a gambler toys with luck that's run out. She pictured the juror's affidavit cooling under a clerk's hand, a stamp drying into permanence. She pictured Monroe in a room with no cameras, anger stripping the coating from his voice. And she pictured a city that had spent a generation believing its institutions were stainless, suddenly tasting iron. She pressed gauze harder against the split skin at her knee, watched the protest outside reform in the orange streetlight, and felt fear stand up inside her and take a step back, making room for something larger. They had taken her desk, her masthead, her sleep. They had pushed her on stone, but they had blinked. The tape was rolling. The names had found paper. The fuse had burned past the point of pinching out with 2 fingers and a smirk. She leaned her forehead against the cool window and whispered to the courthouse silhouette across the street. "You wanted closure. Here it comes." The footage of Colin Bragg shoving her on the courthouse steps played on every local station by sunrise. It replayed in endless loops on social media, cut with captions like, "Who is this man?" and "Caught on camera, mysterious enforcer." Lunges at reporter. Cable hosts debated it with the same split-screen performative outrage they used for scandals and celebrity divorces. But behind the noise, there was something new, something heavier. The collective intake of breath when a city realized the rot wasn't hidden anymore. It was flailing in daylight, caught mid-lunge. Emily watched the clip from a cot in Nina's office, an ice pack pressed to her bruised ribs. Her phone was off. Her burner pinged every half hour with new threats, new attempts to drown her resolve in venom. Liar, fraud, paid puppet. One message simply read, tick, tick, tick. She deleted them, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she couldn't let the words write themselves into her bloodstream. Nina stormed in with coffee and fire. "You're trending," she said flatly, "but so is he. We've got positive. IDs on Bragg, retired marshal, private security, contractor. His face is out there now. They can't unpush that video. Emily winced as she sat up. And Monroe? Nina snorted. Doubled down. Called it a regrettable altercation. And insisted you provoked him. But the footage doesn't lie, Ward. And the public sees it. They're asking why a supposed bailiff is manhandling a reporter instead of guarding a courtroom. By mid-morning, the courthouse plaza swarmed with more protesters. This time not dozens, but hundreds. Their signs were sharper. Their chants louder. Police in riot gear lined the steps, their helmets gleaming in the winter sun. Emily kept her distance, hood pulled low, but she felt the vibration of outrage in the concrete under her feet. A young woman with a megaphone shouted, "You can't buy juries," and the crowd roared back. Every roar cracked Monroe's facade a little wider. Inside, leaks began to drip. A junior clerk texted Nina an internal memo. All inquiries Bragg to be directed to DA's office. Another leak surfaced. An email chain showing Garnet Catering, invoicing the county with Monroe's office CCD. Emily pored over them in the co-working space, her ribs aching, her pulse quick. "They're cracking," she whispered. Fear makes people sloppy, but retaliation moved just as fast. That afternoon, a news smear article hit a right-wing blog. Local reporter with history of mental instability pushes conspiracy to undermine justice. It cited unnamed colleagues who called her obsessed and volatile. It published a grainy photo of her apartment building and hinted at a pattern of erratic behavior. Emily closed the browser with shaking hands. "They're going to make me the story," she said. Nina put a steady hand on her shoulder. "Then let them. Every minute they waste painting you as crazy is a minute they aren't explaining bank deposits and memos. People will see through it." Emily wasn't so sure. She thought of Sanjay, the way he had looked away when he swore he hadn't leaked. Her. She thought of Legal, of the Herald's publisher. Maybe they already believed the smear. Maybe they'd been waiting to. That evening, Alicia called. Her voice was low, urgent. "We have something moving. Don't ask me how I know. Just listen. A grand jury convenes next week. Subpoenas are being drafted for Bragg, Garnet Catering, Judicial Support Solutions. But if you have anything you want on the record, get it to me now, before they shut the window." Emily's chest tightened. This was the opening, the one she'd clawed toward through sleepless nights and bruised bones. "I'll send everything," she said. "Do it through Nina," Alicia warned. "And don't walk alone. Not until the subpoenas land." But even guarded, the danger kept stalking her. She spotted the sedan again, idling near the co-working space. This time she walked straight toward it, camera ready. The car peeled away, but not before she snapped a blurry plate. Theo ran it through his network. Shell rental, same as before. Cash only. They're not hiding, they're circling. That night she lay awake on Nina's office couch, listening to the hum of computers and the distant sirens. She thought of the juror who had signed the affidavit, the way her hand had trembled. If anything happened to that woman, Emily knew she'd never forgive herself. The next day brought fire. ProPublica published the affidavit under seal, details redacted, but the essence intact. Jurors pressured, envelopes slipped, lines recited in deliberation that had never been spoken in open court. A story exploded. National anchors repeated the phrase, "scripted jury." The governor issued a statement. If true, these allegations represent a profound breach of trust. The people of this state deserve answers. Hale's attorneys called it a smear campaign, but they looked less like sharks now and more like flailing fish. Protesters returned in waves. Courthouse steps buried in bodies chanting for resignations. Emily watched from a rooftop across the street, notebook. In her lap, scarf wrapped tight against the wind. She scribbled details. The rhythm of chants, the look on deputies' faces, the way cameras panned across signs like they were scanning a crime scene. This was history, raw and messy, and she was both witness and participant. She knew she should feel triumphant, but the weight pressed heavier. She wasn't done. They weren't beaten. Hyle still walked free. Monroe still held pressers. Bragg still lurked in shadows with his lapel pin and his fists. The machine was wobbling, but it hadn't collapsed at sunset. Her burner buzzed. A text from Alicia. Bragg subpoena served. Monroe fighting. Halle law firm lawyering up. More. Soon. Emily felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The fuse was burning faster now. But almost immediately, another message came through from an unknown number. A photo. Her father's house 2 states away. The caption, "Family bleeds too." Emily gasped, clutching the phone. She hadn't spoken to her father in weeks. He barely followed her work. But they knew where he lived. They knew how to break her if the threats against her weren't enough. She showed Nina, voice shaking. Nina's face hardened. This is desperation. They wouldn't be reaching this far if they weren't cornered. We'll get him safe. Focus on finishing. Emily nodded, but tears blurred her eyes. This wasn't abstract anymore. It was bloodline. It was legacy. That night, she drafted her own statement. Not for a paper, not for an outlet, but for the city. She wrote, "The evidence I've seen is real." The jury in Victor Hale's trial was not impartial. It was manipulated, scripted, purchased. This is not rumor. This is not obsession. This is theft from every person who ever believed. In a courtroom, she saved it, encrypted it, and scheduled it to post if she didn't check in every 12 hours. A dead man's switch. Insurance against silence by midnight. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she couldn't sleep. She thought of the rabbit left. On her desk, the Polaroid slipped under her door, the cartridge casing on the floor. She thought of the juror whispering in a food court, of Theo's late-night flash drive, of Sanjay's tired eyes. She thought of every voice that had tried to warn her off, and every voice that had whispered truth anyway. And she knew the story wasn't about her anymore. It was about a city staring at its own reflection and deciding if it liked what it saw. Dawn broke. The protests doubled again. Drones hovered overhead. National anchors went live from courthouse steps. And Emily stood in the crowd, hood low, bruises hidden, whispering to herself, "One more push. Just one more." The city didn't sleep the week the grand jury convened. Even from Nina's cramped office window, Emily could see the courthouse floodlit against the winter sky, ringed with satellite trucks, barricades, and a restless tide of protesters who wouldn't go home. The chants rose day and night, hoarse but relentless. "You can't buy justice. No more Holly. No more lies." The air smelled of cardboard signs and coffee, and something sharper anger simmered into resolve. Inside, subpoenas moved like blades. Colin Bragg was dragged into a side entrance under guard, cameras catching the moment his lapel pin glinted before he shoved a folder over his face. Garnet Catering's owners were called next, a couple who looked like retirees but walked with the tension of people who knew their tidy lives had just been unraveled in public. Deputy Miles Key disappeared for 2 days before surfacing with a lawyer at his side. Lips pressed so thin they were nearly bloodless. Ada Monroe, immaculate as always, arrived flanked by aides who looked younger than interns, his smile stretched tight enough to crack. The footage looped endlessly on cable news, anchors asking the same question in 10 different ways. Did the system sell itself? Emily watched all of it from the edges, never stepping into the press pen, never raising her hand at briefings. She was radioactive, and everyone knew it. But she was also the reason the courthouse plaza looked like a protest camp. Every chant outside was a distorted echo of her notes, her files, her questions that had clawed into daylight. And yet she felt no triumph, only dread, because she knew how power worked in this city. Even cornered, it found cracks to slip through. And she was one crack away from being silenced for good. On the third day, Elise outcalled. Her voice was low but electric. "Ward, you're up." Emily froze. "Up?" Alicia's breath crackled over the line. "The grand jury wants you. They want the source of the files, the chain of custody, the threats. They want the voice behind it. It's not optional." Emily sat down hard, her legs trembling. She'd written the story 100 different ways, but never this version, the one where she became Exhibit A. "If I walk in there," she whispered, "I don't walk out the same." Alicia's tone softened. "Nobody walks out of this the same, but you'll walk out with the truth on record. That's worth something." That night, she couldn't breathe. She walked the city in circles, past shuttered bodegas and glowing street lamps, past the courthouse where chants still rattled the air. She stopped at the steps and touched the stone where her knees had split open when Bragg shoved her. The scar still ached in the cold. She whispered to herself, "One more step, just one." The next morning, she entered the grand jury room through a side corridor, flanked by marshals who eyed her like she might dissolve. The room was plain wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a dozen citizens staring back with tired eyes. The foreman asked her to state her name for the record. Her throat dried, but she forced the words out. Emily Ward, investigative reporter. For 3 hours, she told them everything. The jurors' trembling words in the food court, the envelopes, the catering invoices, the bank deposits, the Polaroid, the casing, the W-9 with Bragg's name. She passed them copies of files, dates scribbled in her cramped handwriting, arrows linking names like a spider's map of corruption. She played them the recording of the juror, whispering about lines ready. Her own voice cracked only once when she described finding the stuffed rabbit on her desk. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She let the raw absurdity of the truth sit in the stale air until the jurors shifted uncomfortably. At the end, one older woman with graying hair leaned forward. "Ms. Ward, why did you keep going, even when you were told to stop?" Emily's throat tightened. She thought of every warning, every smear, every threat. She thought of Sanjay, of Theo, of Nina. She thought of the courthouse spire and the chants outside. Finally, she said, "Because if I stopped, then the next time you sat in that chair, it could be your verdict being bought, or your child's, or your neighbor's, and then we wouldn't have courts anymore. We'd just have auctions." Silence held the room like a vice. Then the foreman nodded once. "Thank you." She walked out shaking, adrenaline and terror clashing in her veins. Alicia met her in the corridor, her jaw tight. "You did what needed to be done." Emily stared at her. Was it enough? Alicia didn't answer. She didn't need to. The question would hang in the city's air until the verdict. The days after blurred into a fever dream. The grand jury. Transcripts leaked in slivers. Bragg was indicted on charges of jury tampering and conspiracy. Garnet Catering's shell owners were hit with fraud and campaign finance violations. Deputy Miles Key resigned in disgrace, his statement full of words like oversight and miscommunication that nobody believed. And Monroe dug in like a man trying to stop a landslide with bare hands. He held pressers, snarled at reporters, swore the allegations were baseless. But when a photo surfaced of him dining with Hale's defense counsel the week before jury selection, even his allies began to falter. By the 7th day, calls for his resignation screamed from headlines. Victor Hawley himself stayed quiet, cloistered in his penthouse, but silence had become its own admission. Investors pulled back. Projects stalled. Protesters moved from the courthouse to his office towers, chaining themselves to revolving doors. The city, once indifferent, was awake now, hangry, restless, unwilling to be lulled back to sleep. Through it all, Emily felt like a ghost of herself. She had no newsroom, no masthead, no badge, just her notebook, her burns, her bruises, her stubborn pulse. But strangers stopped her on the street now. A bus driver leaned out of his window and shouted, "Keep going, Lord." A mother pressed her hand and whispered, "My son's trial is next month. Thank you." For every threat that still buzzed her phone, 10 voices rose to drown it. She wasn't alone anymore. The night the grand jury announced its full list of indictments, the plaza erupted. Emily stood in the crowd, pulled down this time, letting the chance wash over her. Her phone buzzed with a final message from an unknown number. She opened it, bracing for venom. Instead, it read, "We lost." Just 2 words. But they felt heavier than all the threats combined. She deleted it and looked up at the courthouse spire, glowing in floodlight like a monument finally, stripped of its illusions. And in that moment, she thought about the cost. About Sanjay's weary eyes, about Theo's paranoia, about the juror's trembling hand, about the rabbit, the Polaroid, the casing, about the countless nights she'd lain awake, wondering if the knock at the door would be her last. The story had consumed her, burned pieces of her she might never get back. But it had also lit a fire she knew wouldn't go out. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled the last line she would write about this case. Justice is never bought cheap. It's paid for in fear, in scars, in voices that refuse silence. She closed the notebook and smiled faintly. The battle wasn't over. Corruption never vanished. It only retreated. But the city had seen its reflection. And once you see rot, you can't unsee it. Emily turned to the crowd and thought of the people who would hear her story not in print, not in court, but here now in the retelling. People who could keep the fire alive, who could spread it wider, who could make sure silence never reclaimed the truth. And she whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough to carry, "If this story matters to you, don't keep it. Tell it, pass it on, speak it loud. And if you want more stories like this, voices that refuse to be bought, then stay close. Lend your voice. Leave your mark. We'll need every one." The chants roared back, echoing off stone and glass. Emily closed her eyes, letting the sound carry her, knowing this was not an ending but a beginning, and the city, her city, was finally awake.